For more than a decade,
the Center for Global Development has made a difference
in climate change,
fragile states,
vaccine development,
migration,
third world debt,
governance,
trade,
agricultural innovation,
health,
education.
The global financial crisis had its roots in Wall Street and Washington, but the fallout threatened some of the poorest people in the world, people who lacked the means to cope with the loss of trade, remittances, and livelihoods. The G20 summit in London in the spring of 2009 was an opportunity for global leaders to make it possible for developing countries to participate in the global stimulus, which was a necessary part of dealing with the crisis. And it would also help to stem the panic. The question was how much money was needed and where would it come from? The global financial crisis is the kind of problem where the Center for Global Development really excels. And we have the ability to respond quickly to rapidly changing global events.
In February 2009, I prepared a CGD note estimating that the low-income countries and emerging market economies would need access to as much as $1 trillion to be able to cope with the effects of the global financial crisis. Because $1 trillion is a lot of money, and it sounded like a lot at the time, put together a kind of blueprint for how those resources could plausibly be made available.
We channeled the plan to the right people at the right time. We were thrilled when UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, among others, picked up our plan for a $1 trillion stimulus package for the developing world. 1 month after we released Nancy's note, the G20 met and announced agreements ensuring that $1.1 trillion would be available for developing countries to cope with the crisis. But that wasn't the end of the story.
President Obama and Secretary Geithner had taken important global leadership in getting this plan on the table. The next key step was that Congress agree to boosting IMF resources.
We launched a quiet outreach effort on the Hill, briefing senior staffers in private. And Nancy testified twice before congressional subcommittees. Not long after, we received an email from Ted Truman, who was working at the US Treasury on the G20 negotiations. Dear Nancy, good news. You got your $1 trillion from the G20, plus some. The $1 trillion pledge helped to stem the panic, and it made it possible for the IMF and the World Bank and other lenders to help developing countries cope with the crisis.
Developing countries desperately need energy and clean energy. And it's generally accepted that they have a right to catch up. But the question is, what is this right to catch up? Is it a right to pollute, as most people were saying? Or is it a right to energy, as Nancy Birdsall and I wrote in a paper? And when we did so, it raised hackles. It's clear, however, that unless we get more clean energy in the rich world, in the poor world, we're all going to be in trouble.
Rich countries cause this problem, and rich countries will have to take the lead in addressing it. Strategic investment in clean technology is the key, and that was the idea behind the Clean Technology Fund, which was proposed by the Bush administration in 2007 and managed by the World Bank. We have to focus the Clean Technology Fund on renewables that will compete with coal once the renewables are operating at large scale. I researched the alternatives and concluded that solar thermal power was a great candidate for investment by the CTF. We at the Center wanted the World Bank to succeed in managing the Clean Technology Fund, but right from the start, we saw worrisome signs. The first was that the bank refused to consider solar thermal power. The second was that the bank actually supported investments by the CTF in coal-fired power. And the third sign that was worrisome emerged when I went to Karma to look into the bank's plans.
Carbon Monitoring for Action, otherwise known as Karma, is a public database and an interactive website that David created. Now, what does Karma show? It gives data on all the emissions from power plants all around the world, and what the data show are really striking. There's a lot of CO2 being spewed out from especially coal-fueled power plants in developing countries and in rich countries.
Karma revealed that the World Bank intended to fund massive coal-fired power plants in southern Africa and northwest India, precisely the places with huge solar potential. When we saw this, we knew that we had to act quickly and forcefully.
The center produced working papers, newsletters, and blogs, and explained the issues clearly to members of Congress. Environmental activists picked up the issue.
The center launched a campaign within the World Bank. I met with people there, gave the keynote address at a meeting of senior energy managers, and testified in Congress.
Testifying in a congressional committee was very important, and then posting that testimony on YouTube was really powerful. A lot of important people in the right places saw that video.
The purpose of this fund should be to make clean power as cheap as dirty power. Full stop. If we can't do that, we lose.
In February 2009, Congress said no to its clean technology contribution unless the World Bank changed its plans.
By the end of the year, the World Bank had turned around. It dropped support for coal-fired power, got behind solar thermal power, and arranged for CTF funding for large solar thermal projects in Africa. And that persuaded Congress to support the Clean Technology Fund.
David pushed the Clean Technology Fund in the right direction. And going forward, we at the center are going to be pushing the development and financing of green technologies.
Funding for HIV/AIDS has increased massively in the last few years. In 2008 alone, $9 billion of funding were committed globally to HIV/AIDS to reduce deaths from AIDS as well as to prevent HIV infections. But are these monies being used in the best possible way? We developed the HIV/AIDS Monitor, which is an initiative that does in-depth analyses on the three major donors, PEPFAR, the Global Fund, and the World Bank MAP program. And we studied this in 3 countries, Mozambique, Zambia, and Uganda. And the idea was to understand how donors use this aid. The best way to do this research was to collaborate with local researchers to try and understand how aid was being delivered.
I think the funders were at first a bit skeptical, perhaps even a bit apprehensive to be scrutinized so closely. But I believe they came to see that the monitor was helping them to do better what they wanted to do in order to improve their own performance.
One of the main things we encountered in the process of doing this research was that donors didn't reveal a lot of information about the program. So we pushed for greater information disclosure.
Yes, what we are learning from the aid monitor research is going to have real impact here on the ground to improve the effectiveness of aid.
We worked with our local research partners to try and track the 3 donors to understand how they make funding decisions against performance, how they have used existing health systems to deliver these programs, and how, for example, they've responded to certain groups like women and young girls. And in doing this research, we then developed recommendations that we shared with the donors so that they can act on these recommendations to improve the performance of each of their programs. We release our findings through publications that we post on the web, by doing events to inform the public, the donors, as well as Congress, and those who are affected by HIV/AIDS.
Immediately after a push from the monitor, PEPFAR started releasing to the public the detailed data on what it was spending on each country, making it accountable to the public for its performance on the ground.
We see the influence of our research on the 3 donors, of course, but also on a range of other stakeholders.
Going forward, donors and recipient countries need to strive for an AIDS transition, where AIDS mortality stays low, But better prevention pushes new infections even lower, so that the number of people living with this devastating disease finally begins to fall.
The people who work at the Center for Global Development have this magical combination of being very smart, very intelligent, very focused, and very passionate about the mission of the center, which is all about making lives better in the developing world. We have an amazing board. They act as ambassadors for our mission in the larger worlds that they occupy. I feel, after 10 years, just incredibly excited and proud of what we've been able to accomplish in what really is a relatively short amount of time. My ambition for the center for the next 10 years is that we stay youthful and agile while becoming even more mature and even more influential.
What does CGD mean to me? An amazing community of deeply passionate and committed individuals.
Intellectually rigorous.
Intelligence.
Innovative.
Hard work. Fun.
Open-minded.
Quality research.
Thought-provoking.
We take our work seriously, but not ourselves.
Action-oriented.
Solutions.